I still recommend that to this day. As someone who runs a startup, if someone were to message me being like, hey, I see a bug, here's how I might consider fixing it. If I were hiring, they would like jump to the top of the stack.
Today, I will be interviewing Sam Carow. She is the CTO of a startup called DwellWell, a startup on a mission to make the home buying process suck less. Sam has an amazing ability to execute on ideas and bring people together to solve complex problems. Her startup has already been voted as one of the top 50 startups to work in LA. She has an amazing framework for finding high-impact work, which she discusses during the video. And that framework can also be applied to not just work in a big company, but also to a startup. This is Sam Carow. So let's dive right in. This is 2013. Sam, what are you doing in 2013?
Great question. In 2013, I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I was waitressing at a restaurant in Los Angeles and tinkering with a couple computer science classes at the local community college, but only because a couple friends of mine had been pushing me towards considering computer science, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. I had no background in computer science or anything technical. And a friend of mine told me about a program called Dev Bootcamp, which at the time, coding boot camps were not a thing. No one had ever heard of them before. So I had to apply, wrote a check with like the last money that I had in my bank account, crossed my fingers that it wasn't a scam because quite literally no one had heard of it before. Got accepted, moved up to San Francisco, and started the boot camp.
You know, it's so funny that you talk about boot camp, especially with the way tech layoffs have been going crazy. And for new grads or people just getting out of boot camp who want to get into the industry, what would you recommend for them, especially since you got in using such a unique method?
Great question. So I knew that if I sent my resume out to get hired, there was no way I was ever going to get my foot in the door. My resume was 9 months of life insurance sales and then a year of waitressing experience. And that's it. No computer science degree, no nothing. And so I knew that I would have to do something a little bit unique. So what I did is I would go on Angel List, which is where lots of startups list their hiring boards. And I would go through every single landing page for each startup and find a bug on their landing page. Because they're startups, all of them are going to have bugs somewhere. You can probably find them, even if it's just silly CSS bugs with resizing the page. So I would find the bug, guess the email address of the founder, which was usually just first name at startupname.io was hot at the time. Now it might be .com or .co or whatever. And I would say, hey, I saw on your site, like, first of all, I love your product, blah, blah, blah. I saw this bug on your site. Here's how I might fix it. Just wanted to give you a heads up. By the way, I'm going to be in town. Would love to grab coffee because I'm like casually looking for something new. So maybe there's a good fit here. Let me know. And actually the first person that I emailed out a bunch of those things, but the first person I emailed got back to me and was like, oh my God, this is great. Actually, yeah, let's get coffee. We got coffee. I really didn't even do a real technical interview beyond that. And then I got hired. So it was crazy. I highly recommend. No one ever listens to me. I still recommend that to this day. As someone who runs a startup, if someone were to message me being like, hey, I see a bug, here's how I might consider fixing it. If I were hiring, they would like jump to the top of the stack for me because they're providing value right out the gate. And so that's how I got my first job. I always recommend people give it a try if they're having like a little bit of trouble getting their foot in the door. You want to provide value from the first moment you connect. And that's what I've found to be really, really helpful when I was first starting.
I don't know if you remember this, but there was a Reddit post that you made titled From Waitress to CTO in 10 Years. In that article, you talk about how you were immune to rejection. And this is something that I learned as somebody who recently quit their job, how nice it is to not have the weight of obligation on you and how that gives you the freedom to move mad. Now that you have the weight of investors, of coworkers, of customers, how do you still allow yourself to take radical action like you used to?
Oh man, that's a great question. I guess, why don't you tell me how you define radical action and then maybe I can answer that better.
I feel like at the beginning of a startup, you feel the founder's unique sense of humor, and that humor hasn't been filtered through lots of layers of HR. I also feel like once you have obligation, you begin to take less risk because you don't want to be too edgy and alienate any of your customers. So maybe not radical action, but how do you allow yourself to pivot easily and to move without fear?
Yeah, I think so. It's interesting. I think, let me think about how I want to answer this. It's definitely scary making big decisions when you're acutely aware of how much runway you have until your company is dead. That's very different. I had never really thought about that before at Reddit or at any previous startup that I had been an employee at. And now that I am the founder of a startup, I'm acutely aware that every single risk that we take, if it fails, we will have failed and now be 4 months closer to our death date if it didn't work. And so that definitely is sobering, but if you don't take risks in a startup, your company's going to die anyways. And so what you have to do is figure out what is the likelihood that the things we're taking big bets on, what's the likelihood that they pan out? And you can weight that around what's important for your company. So like we can weight it around how much financial impact will this have? How much reach will this have? How much will our users love it? How easy is it to build? And so what we do is prioritize each and every item according to like how we weight each of those things in order for us to take calculated risks. And so that makes me feel much more comfortable because not taking any risk is the same risk as taking a risk, because your company could just die if what you're doing isn't working or isn't growing fast enough. You have to change what you're doing. So I think like having the understanding that like anything you do is kind of equal risk, whether you take a risk or just keep doing what you're doing, both of those things have an equal chance at failure. So you might as well jump for the thing that you think is going to jumpstart your business. In terms of like feeling free and not having like those HR layers that you're talking about, we are still a small team. So we are 11 people and we try to be like radically transparent with what we're doing, how much money we have left in the bank, what our runway is, what our hiring plans are, what the goals that we've set out to accomplish are, like our user goals, our growth numbers, our finances. None of that is hidden from anybody on our team. And so we don't feel pressured, for example, to like paint a story for our employees that isn't true. Our job right now is to motivate everybody. We're all on the same team. Everybody has equity. And so everybody deserves to know the status of like what's happening with DwellWell, the business.
With the origins of DwellWell, your co-founder literally woke up one day and serendipitously reached out to you and said, I am starting this company. I want you to be my co-founder. And in that same Reddit post, you talk about the founders of Airbnb, Slack, and Lyft were just lucky. They were in the right place at the right time. So how would you respond to somebody who says they are the wrong place at the wrong time and how they could become luckier?
Yeah. Well, I'm the CTO, not CEO. So my co-founder is the CEO and I'm the CTO. And it's interesting. I think like, so he and I met, my co-founder, we met at the first startup that I got a job at after boot camp. So he was on the business side. I was obviously on the tech side of the house. And so we had kept in touch, but it had never occurred to me that we would in 10 years time found a company together. I actually never wanted to be a founder. It was not something that appealed to me. I really like being an engineer. I really like doing IC work. And so if running a company felt to me like way too much work for like very little gain, personal gain or reward is very risky. But once he told me his idea, I was like, this is like a once in a lifetime idea. And it's something that I'm really not an ideas person. I'm an executor. He's like the Steve Jobs who actually has like some skill set and can execute, but I am like pure execution usually. So I need a partner who's someone who can think of these big ideas, who can push us forward from a product perspective in the direction we want to go. So it was a little bit of luck, but I put myself in a situation to get lucky by joining a startup, by keeping in touch with people that I thought were very passionate. But what I think you're really getting at, you asked, is there a way that you can generate your own luck in these situations? And the answer to me is yes. So while I was at Reddit, I developed a framework for manifesting your own luck in certain situations and gaining recognition, which I think plays a role both if you're an employee or an IC or a manager, or if you want to strike out and start your own thing. So there's this concept called the Matthew effect. And the Matthew effect states that those who have already been recognized previously are more likely to be recognized for all of their future work, even if their future work is of the same caliber as someone else. If that other person has never received recognition, they are very unlikely to be recognized for the work that they're doing. And so when I stumbled across this concept, I was like, oh my God, this makes so much sense. And this is why sometimes at work, we see these people who are like shining superstars. And we're like, why is it that everything that person does gets recognized by leadership? They seem to be so lucky. The projects they get, everything just seems to like work out for them. So I started thinking, is there a way for me to manufacture this type of luck for myself? And it turns out there is. So I put together a framework. There's 4 steps in it. The first step is to find a pain point that's affecting your company or whatever as a whole. If you're a startup founder, it could be like, what's a pain point that's affecting some population of people as a whole? The second step is to identify the minimum valuable solution, or like, what is the smallest amount of work that I can do that will make a dent in solving the problem? You really want to focus on the minimal solution so that you can use it as a proof point, so you don't spend a ton of time spinning your wheels just for something not to work. The third is talk about your accomplishments once you've achieved a little bit of forward momentum towards solving the problem. Talk about it. Talk about it to everybody. And then the fourth is finally build a framework so other people can jump in and help you solve the rest of the problem. Typically, when people see you succeeding, they will want to step in and help. And the nice part about that is you've now kind of laid claim to the leadership position for that project. And so you can see, obviously, this translates really, really well to projects at work, but it also translates really, really well to startups. Those are the exact steps, basically, you need to follow to have like a really good startup. It's also the steps you should follow to get recognition and get assigned better projects at work and gain that autonomy for yourself at work.
I really love that answer. And I'm so grateful you brought up that framework so I didn't have to bring it up. In one of your previous interviews, you talk about how your career coach told you that you'd be starting a company in the next 3 years and you didn't believe her. As somebody who's fun employed, what are some other interesting things that your career coach has told you that I could steal from?
That's a great question. I remember when my career coach, she was like, I think you're going to start your own company. And I was like, are you out of your mind? I was like, in no world am I interested in doing that. And then 3 years later, I emailed her. Actually, I don't see her anymore because she like Reddit provided her as a benefit for me. And now I can't afford it because I'm a startup founder. And I emailed her and I was like, you were right. Here's what I'm doing. And she responded. She was like, ha, 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 I told you. So let's see, what's some advice she told me? I think maybe the best thing that she did for me was she assured me that like my interpretation of certain situations was not off. A lot of times in meetings, or if I was like asserting myself in a certain way, later on, I'd be like, oh my God, did I assert myself too much there? Do those people now think that I'm like rude or too direct? Or like, is my read of this situation wrong? Especially if I stood up for myself or if I stood up for a team member or like pushed back in any way. And my career coach was like, if the things you're describing are completely reasonable, and if somebody has a negative response to you, it's not your problem to make sure that everybody always has a positive reaction to what you're saying. That's not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to do the best you can with the information that you're given with, kindness and tact, but ultimately, you should not feel weird or ashamed for pushing back. It's very normal to push back, and it's not your job to ensure that everybody has a positive reaction to whatever you're saying. And that was very freeing for me because I am like, I really want people to have a positive reaction to what I'm saying to them. And she's like, you can't guarantee that. You don't need to worry about it. As long as you're operating with integrity, as much kindness as you can, and being direct, you're not responsible for the reaction that you get.
Your company is on a mission to make the home buying process suck less. And something I've learned from my experience is that user behavior is far weirder than you would imagine, especially when you're on the inside. What is the most ridiculous or weirdest thing you've learned about the home buying process?
Oh, great question. So we interviewed probably 100 people before we founded, before we really were like, okay, let's quit our jobs and raise money to start this company just to make sure. And the misconceptions that people have, even people who have purchased a home before, still, when we were asking them to recall their experience, still had no idea what they were doing. I've had people be like, well, my agent, I don't like the house I ended up with. And we're like, well, then why did you buy it? And I had someone say, well, I was going to have to pay my agent no matter what. So I figured I might as well buy the house. And I'm like, that's not how agents get paid. You wouldn't have had to pay your agent if you didn't purchase a house. That's not true. Or we had a lot of people who didn't quite understand, there's so many things. If you get a mortgage, you can buy points down on the mortgage. And what does that mean? And what does the math look like? How do I determine if that's the correct situation for me? What type of loan should I get? Can I afford to buy right now? Should I keep renting? What's the math on that? What does that look like for me? Where should I buy? How do I know that the agent I'm working with is trustworthy or that I can rely on them? Because your agent gets paid based off of how much you pay for a house. So aren't there incentives a little bit misaligned there? How can I trust it when I'm not an expert in the home buying process myself? So a lot of people said they felt stupid asking their real estate agent questions because they didn't want to get taken advantage of. And so DwellWell, basically, we're like, hey, we agree. We think that you should have enough understanding of the process that you don't feel intimidated by all the vendors that you're working with. You don't feel like you can't ask these questions or ask us the question. We don't care. We'll answer honestly for you because we're not making money off of how much you spend on a house. We're actually free for home buyers. And so there's no incentive for us to push you into something because we're not making commission on the back end like all the other vendors are.
I mean, for a lot of people, you realize their homes are the largest purchases they're ever going to make in their lifetimes. However, for a lot of them, they go in blind, and that's ridiculous. And they feel like they cannot ask questions about the entire process.
Right. It's completely nuts. I mean, especially in California, right? It's the average home price is somewhere around $1 million. And I'm like, you're telling me you are going to make $1 million commitment and be unsure of what's happening. It's just ludicrous. I mean, it was crazy. We need better education. We need home buyers to understand what they're doing so that they feel comfortable and confident in making that decision.
So I am the supreme sire of the universe, and I have given you the power to have ultimate control over the U.S. housing market. What is the one thing in the U.S. housing market that you would change?
Great question. Personally, I think that we need to build more housing. Right now, there is a bit of a housing shortage. A lot of that comes from the 2008 financial crisis. A lot of builders stopped building because they lost money or their companies went under, or people were basically getting mortgages who shouldn't have been allowed to get mortgages, defaulted on those properties, and then the builders wouldn't get paid. And so we have a housing shortage. We need to invest money into building more housing. Personally, I do think there should be taxes or fees on fourth, fifth, sixth, residences that people have that they don't rent them out. I think that it's irresponsible for people to own so much property and not rent it out or use it, like allow people to live in there. I think fine. If you want to have your primary residence, a vacation home, a ski home, great, good for you. But I think it starts getting excessive when you have multiple properties and they're just sitting empty and you're not renting them to people. I think that's a big issue. I would also love mortgage rates to find an equilibrium. Essentially what happened during the pandemic is that interest rates were artificially deflated so that the market wouldn't crash. What ended up happening is because mortgage rates were so low, people flooded the market and started purchasing property. Because of that, there was like crazy bidding wars and all of this stuff. Now that the interest rates are not artificially lower, they're exploding up in the other direction, which is fine for now. I would like to see it hit an equilibrium where the housing prices go down to reflect the increase in mortgage rates. Typically, when mortgage rates go up, home prices go down. And then inversely, like we saw during COVID, when mortgage rates go down, the prices increase because now people can afford more house because the loan amount, the interest rate is smaller. So I'd like to see it hit an equilibrium. I think it will. But those are the things I think I would change if I could.
So I have two questions left, and this is a funny one. If I remember correctly, there were two Slack channels. One was for 90 Day Fiancé, and one was for the Real Housewives. And if I remember correctly, you were active on both channels. Is reality TV still your poison of choice? Because I still love 90 Day Fiancé. In fact, I have a running joke that when I was in America, that I would leave the country just to marry an American just to be on that show. That was how dedicated I was.
Oh my God, you hit it right on the head. Trash TV is chef's kiss. Actually, Vanderpump Rules is my favorite trash TV. Their new season's coming out next week. I cannot wait. It is the light and joy of my life. So trash TV, yes. 90 Day Fiancé, love it. Can't get enough. I love Summer House. Oh, just Bravo as a whole is my poison of choice.
Now that we have a couple of minutes left, tell us about the awesome things you're building at DwellWell.
Great. So the way we think about DwellWell is the homebuyer hub where you can have access to the people, places, and things to help get you home without all the bullshit. That's what the platform is. We can connect you to any vendor that it is you need to connect to, whether that's real estate agents that have been pre-vetted by us. We can get you pre-approved. We can get you originate a mortgage for you. We can recommend moving companies, inspectors, insurance people, essentially all that nonsense that goes on when you buy a house. It's all contained to one hub, which is DwellWell. It's also free for all home buyers to use. We make money from our vendors, so you never have to worry about that. As a home buyer, we already think you're paying enough money in the transaction that we don't want to take any money off the table that you're going to be using for a down payment or closing costs or anything like that. And so on DwellWell, we'll walk you through every single step and stage that you need. We're there to answer questions that you have right now. Since we're small, we can be special concierge if you're needing advice about a home purchase. And that's what we're doing at DwellWell.
I'm just waiting for DwellWell to be a multi-billion-dollar company so you can come over to Europe. And I just want to make a case for Portugal. So don't go to Germany, don't go to France, come to Portugal. That's literally the plan.
Hell yeah, I would love to.
Thank you so much and have a lovely rest of your day.